When Roberto ventured into the forest to bathe in the river, he never imagined that Haneli, the mysterious Apache woman, was watching him. Without hiding, she sat calmly studying every movement, and what began as a simple encounter by the water turned into a silent game of glances, secrets, and unexpected lessons. Every moment revealed tension, curiosity, and a connection that neither of them could ignore. The Arizona sun beat down hard on Roberto's small cabin, its dry adobe raising a fine dust that floated in the air like an invisible veil. Every day was a constant struggle with the cattle, the fences, and the oppressive silence. Roberto had left behind the East with its ghosts and noisy memories, seeking here on the frontier a peace that could only be earned with sweat and effort. His ranch was small, enough for a hardy herd of cattle and a loyal horse named Atlas. Roberto's hands were hardened from years of work, capable of holding a hammer or a rifle with the same firmness. He preferred the former. His body, strong and marked, reflected a life of physical labor, but his blue eyes showed a deeper, older fatigue. He was approaching 40, though some mornings, when looking in the small mirror hanging on the wall, he saw a much older man. That day, the heat was especially stifling. The cattle took refuge under the sparse shade of the mesquites, motionless and silent. After repairing the last section of fence damaged by a daring coyote, Roberto felt sweat and dirt clinging to his skin like a second layer. His thoughts focused on the spring, his secret and sanctuary hidden at the end of a small rocky canyon. To reach it, one had to know the winding path between Ocotillos and the majestic Saguaros. It was a place unknown to all, a cool oasis amid a scorching desert. The water was so clear that every stone on the bottom seemed to count itself. The canyon walls were adorned with ferns clinging to the shade, while the murmur of water was the only music breaking the desert silence. Leaving Atlas at the entrance, Roberto descended the familiar path, feeling the cool, damp air envelop him. He undressed calmly, leaving his worn clothes on a hot rock. His body bore the story of his life, a white scar on his thigh, a reminder of a bullet in Gettysburg, and other paler marks that spoke of battles and forgotten trials. As he submerged himself in the cold water, a sigh of relief escaped his lips. The biting freshness washed away the fatigue from his aching muscles and the tension of life on the frontier. For a moment, all weight vanished. Leaving only the feeling of freedom, he lay back on the rock, closing his eyes and listening to the murmur of water and the distant song of a bird. Here, he found the peace he had endured war and desert hardships for. Each breath was a moment of deep relief, but something changed in the atmosphere. An ancient instinct, honed through years of survival, alerted him. He was not alone. The bird's song stopped, and the wind seemed to freeze. He slowly opened his eyes, careful and silent in his movements. There, about 20 meters away, sitting on a rock ledge, was Yaneli, motionless, seeming part of the landscape, observing without fear or concealment. Her unexpected presence did not provoke fear, only an intense curiosity that penetrated deep into his being. Janelli wore a simple tunic made of natural fibers. Her black braided hair fell over her shoulders. She did not try to hide. She simply sat, hands resting on her knees, watching Roberto with a penetrating gaze that seemed to read his soul beyond the skin and soldier's history. Roberto's first reaction, as a man of the frontier, would have been fear or anger. But what he saw in Haneli's eyes froze him. There was no hatred or hostility, only direct and analytical curiosity, a silent study of his existence and vulnerability. She could have fled, hidden, or alerted nearby warriors, yet she chose to remain there observing. Her boldness puzzled him more than any physical threat. The confidence with which she moved and her calmness were an enigma Roberto could not ignore. Janelli had come to the spring, seeking roots of the plant called garadel, necessary to treat her brother Aduet's cough. She had known that secret place since childhood, a refuge passed down by her mother, and had never encountered a white man there before. Hearing the murmur of the water, she approached cautiously, perhaps expecting to find a wild animal. Roberto's presence surprised her, but did not frighten her. She had seen white men before, but none radiated the calm and vulnerability he showed at that moment. Roberto in the water was without weapons or possessions. He was not a threat. His way of surrendering to the bath showed a quiet serenity and sadness, a contrast to the agitation she associated with white men. Janelli's curiosity overcame her instinct to flee. She sat, determined to understand. Her silence was dense, full of unspoken questions, of observation and study. Every gesture, every breath of Roberto seemed to carry a meaning she sought to decipher. Roberto's world shrank to that canyon, to Janelli, and to the intensity of her gaze. He felt exposed, not because of nudity, but because she saw beyond him, beyond the soldier and the rancher, to the deepest part of his essence. Finally, it was Janelli who broke the spell. She rose slowly, with fluid and graceful movements, without turning her back. She stepped back a few steps, keeping her gaze firmly on his, and disappeared among the rocks with the same discretion as a whisper carried by the wind. Roberto remained in the water, which suddenly felt colder. The silence was no longer the same. Her absence felt alive, like an echo of her presence. He knew something had changed in his world, something he could neither ignore nor fully understand. He mounted Atlas and returned to the ranch, his mind still trapped in the image of Janelli. Every shadow, every movement at the edges of his property seemed to anticipate her return. The spring was no longer just a sanctuary, but a place of mystery and uncertain promises. In the following days, the silence of his ranch acquired a new tension. Every minor sound kept him alert, not out of fear, but from an intense anticipation that made him feel alive. The spring called him urgently, a place now promising encounters beyond the desert's heat. Roberto returned to the spring a few days later, this time more attentive and vigilant. He bathed carefully, observing each rock and listening to the wind. And there she was again, Janelli, standing by the ledge, holding a small leather pouch and a stick for gathering roots, her presence as natural as before. Their eyes met again. The surprise turned into cautious recognition. Roberto stood, dressed slowly, and sat by the edge, showing he was not a threat. With a gesture, he indicated the pouch she carried, attempting to communicate beyond words. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe using the button below. Also, turn on the notification bell and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. Janelli placed the pouch on the rock. Her skilled fingers opened the fabric and began taking out small roots and herbs. Her movement was precise, almost ceremonial. As if each plant told an ancient story, knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Roberto watched her in silence, trying to decipher every gesture, every glance, every decision she made. The way she moved was unlike any other woman he had ever known. Her calm and confidence seemed to defy the laws of the desert and the world he knew. She spoke for the first time, her voice soft but firm, breaking the canyon's silence. She spoke in her native tongue, and Roberto listened without understanding. Yet the tone conveyed respect, intent, and curiosity. He felt that each word carried a weight he could not yet decipher. Janelli pointed to the water, then to Roberto, then to herself. With slow, deliberate gestures, she indicated that this place was sacred and that her visit was not casual. Roberto nodded slowly, understanding that he must respect this space and not interfere with her work. While collecting the herbs, Janelli glanced at him, evaluating his reaction. Roberto remained calm, showing patience and respect. He knew the frontier did not forgive arrogance, and that trust was earned through gestures more than words. The wind gently stirred her hair, and the sun fell at angles that lit Roberto's skin with a golden hue. Janelli noticed every detail, every muscle, every scar, not with judgment, but with the simple observation of someone who understood life's harshness. Roberto finally broke the silence, pointing to a root she had dropped. Janelli smiled slightly, accepting the silent correction, and they shared a moment that needed no words. Every gesture was a language of its own, a conversation that transcended tongue and culture. She sat near the edge, crossing her legs while continuing her work. Her movements were almost musical, a rhythm that seemed to mark the time of the canyon and life itself. Roberto felt intrigued but also captivated, unable to look away. The water reflected both their faces, blending their image with the ferns and stones. Roberto saw in his reflection the vulnerability that Haneli observed, and for the first time, he felt truly seen. Not as a rancher, not as a cowboy, but as a man. Haneli now spoke in basic Spanish, short and precise words, inviting him to come closer. Roberto hesitated, gauging the distance between respect and curiosity. Finally he rose, letting his bare feet touch the wet sand, feeling the freshness and damp earth under his skin. He sat beside her, without invading her space, simply sharing the air and sunlight. Both knew this moment was delicate, a balance between observation and trust, between vulnerability and mutual respect. An instant that seemed suspended outside of time. Haneli showed him how to choose the correct routes, pointing out texture, color, and shape. Roberto imitated her movements clumsily at first, then with greater care, and she smiled, appreciating the sincere effort more than perfect skill. Silence settled again, but it was a comfortable silence, full of tacit understanding. The sound of the water, the wind among the ocotillos, and the distant steps of an animal completed the scene. They both breathed together, sharing the same calm, the same attention to the canyon's details. She lifted a root and showed it to Roberto, indicating how it should be prepared. He nodded, absorbing every instruction. Every gesture of Haneli seemed to teach more than just the use of plants. It seemed to teach patience, observation, and connection with the earth. As the sun began to descend, the canyon filled with long shadows. Roberto noticed that Haneli's presence made him perceive the desert differently, more deeply, more aware of the life that inhabited it. Janelli stood to gather the pouch, and Roberto did the same, showing that he could cooperate without imposing himself. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was silent understanding. This place and moment were shared, but each maintained their essence intact. The sound of a branch breaking in the distance made them both look toward the source, alert but not afraid. There was no danger, only the reminder that they were in living territory, where every presence must respect the other and the surrounding nature. She sat again, taking water from the spring with her hands, while Roberto watched, fascinated by the grace and confidence of every movement. There was no artifice, only authenticity, and that kept him in a kind of reverent tension. Roberto finally spoke, asking quietly something that Janelli partially understood. She responded with gestures and simple words, teaching him what the roots could heal and what should be avoided. Each instruction was a small fragment of a world he had never known. While packing the herbs, Haneli indicated that the afternoon was falling fast and it was time to return. Roberto offered to accompany her, and she nodded, not out of necessity, but as acceptance of his presence and the respect he had shown all afternoon. They climbed together along the path, careful with the slippery rocks and sharp ocotillos. The reddish sun illuminated their silhouettes, blending the earth, water, and sky into a tableau of silent complicity and mutual respect. A scene the desert would remember. Upon reaching the canyon's edge, Janelli looked at Roberto with intensity. He understood that this gesture was not a complete farewell, but an unspoken promise. Their paths would cross again, under rules yet to be discovered. Roberto nodded, acknowledging the signal, and watched as she disappeared among the bushes, her figure merging with the desert's shadows. The spring remained behind, but her presence lived on in every rock and leaf wet from the water. He mounted Atlas and returned to the ranch, feeling a strange restlessness in his chest. It was not fear or anxiety, but the nascent curiosity of someone who had been observed and understood, and who had begun to understand, even minimally, another culture, another world. That night, under the stars, Roberto thought of Haneli's figure by the spring, her eyes, her gestures, and the way she had looked at him without judgment or fear. The frontier felt wider and more mysterious than ever. The silence of the ranch seemed different. Every sound, from the wind to the nocturnal animals, reminded him of Haneli's presence and the need to respect a space that was not his. A mixture of admiration and anticipation kept him alert until dawn. Roberto knew the encounter with Janelli was not over. The curiosity it awakened in both of them was an invisible thread connecting them, a silent bond of observation, respect, and interest that went beyond mere survival or the daily routine of the ranch. Roberto woke before dawn, feeling the night's cold still clinging to his skin. The memories of the previous afternoon with Haneli by the spring filled his mind, mixing with the scent of damp earth and burned wood from the ranch. He dressed quickly, preparing his horse for an early ride. Something inside him told him he could not wait to return to the canyon. The curiosity and sense of connection that had arisen with Janelli were too strong to ignore, even before the sun lit the horizon. The morning wind stirred the branches as he rode along familiar paths. Each step of Atlas seemed to bring him closer to the spring, to the figure he could not stop imagining. His heart beat with a mix of anticipation and respect for the territory he was about to enter. Upon reaching the canyon's edge, Roberto stopped and surveyed the landscape. The spring shone with the soft light of dawn, and the sound of water seemed to invite him closer. The calm of the place contrasted with the tension he felt inside. Janelli emerged from the bushes, moving with the same confidence and grace as the previous afternoon. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Roberto felt that she was evaluating him, measuring if his presence still deserved respect. She indicated with a gesture that he could come closer. Roberto dismounted slowly, careful with every movement. He knew that any sudden action would break the delicate line of trust they had begun to build the day before. He sat by the spring without invading Haneli's space. Both remained silent, listening to the sound of the water and the whispers of the wind among the ocotillos. It was a silence full of understanding, where words were unnecessary and every gesture told its own story. Janelli took a bundle of herbs and began preparing an ointment. Her fingers moved with precision and ritual, showing Roberto the process without lengthy explanations. He watched attentively, fascinated by the concentration and care she demonstrated in every movement. The cowboy finally spoke, asking about the uses of the plants. Janelli responded with simple words and clear gestures, teaching him how to recognize the correct roots and leaves. Roberto imitated her movements clumsily at first, then with more confidence, earning a slight approving smile. As they worked together, the sun slowly rose, illuminating the canyon with golden tones. Every shadow seemed to move with a life of its own, and Roberto noticed how the light highlighted Haneli's features, her concentrated expression, her hands both firm and delicate at once. Haneli offered him a small container of water, showing him how to mix the ointment correctly. Roberto accepted, surprised by the trust she placed in him. The feeling of participating in such an intimate and ancient ritual filled him with respect and humility. The sound of the water and the song of distant birds created a melody accompanying each gesture. Roberto felt his everyday world fade away, leaving only that shared moment with Janelli, a moment of learning, silence, and deep observation of the canyon's natural life. She looked up and indicated that he could try applying the ointment to his hands. Roberto did so carefully, feeling the texture and aroma of the herbs. Janelli watched him closely, evaluating his respect for the practice and his patience to learn. The wind moved her hair, and Roberto could not help noticing how every detail of Haneli seemed part of the surroundings. It was not just her appearance, but the way she connected with the landscape, with the earth, and with every element around her. Janelli began to speak about the roots, their uses, and dangers. Roberto listened attentively, absorbing every word and gesture. Though he understood only part of her language, the combination of demonstration, tone, and repetition allowed him to comprehend enough to continue learning without mistakes. In the distance, a deer crossed the canyon, and both watched it in silence. The creature seemed aware of their presence, moving with elegance and speed, reminding them that they were in living territory, where every step must be measured and respected carefully. Roberto tried to repeat the gestures Janelli had shown him, concentrating on every movement. She leaned slightly, evaluating and gently correcting without words, only with looks and gestures. Every correction was a lesson, and he absorbed every detail as if his life depended on it. The sun reached its highest point, and Janelli indicated it was time to rest for a moment. Both sat by the spring, sharing a comfortable silence, full of mutual respect and the feeling that this place was teaching them something deeper than mere survival. Roberto leaned toward her, curious to learn more. Janelli nodded, pointing out new roots and leaves. Their hands brushed accidentally while passing the plants, and both felt a brief shiver, a reminder of the humanity present even in the strictest observation of tradition. The water reflected their faces, mixing the sunlight with the canyon's shadows. Roberto saw in her eyes a gleam of determination and wisdom, and understood that he was in the presence of someone who had survived much, someone who could teach him more than any book or past experience. Janelli indicated that they could gather some roots to take back. Roberto moved carefully, following her instructions, feeling the delicacy of the moment. Each root they took was a reminder of the patience and respect demanded by this sacred place. As they collected the last plants, a gentle breeze stirred the water and Janelli's hair. Roberto watched, fascinated by how she combined firmness and softness, knowledge and patience, all in a single movement, feeling privileged to witness that harmony. The canyon began to glow with orange and red tones as the afternoon approached. Janelli carefully stored the plants in her pouch and indicated it was time to return, but not in a hurry, walking slowly, enjoying the environment and every sensation along the path. Both began descending the trail, careful with each step among stones and roots. The closeness built during the day felt tangible, though they maintained a silent respect, a shared space that needed no words to exist, only observation and mutual presence. Before parting, upon reaching the canyon entrance, Janelli looked at Roberto intently, and he understood that this gesture was not merely courtesy, but an unspoken agreement. The learning would continue, the connection would not break. Their paths would cross again, under rules yet to be defined. Roberto returned to the ranch with a racing heart, thinking of every gesture, every word, and every look from Janelli, knowing that this encounter had left a deep mark on him. A mixture of admiration, respect, and curiosity that would not fade over time, but grow with each memory. Roberto woke with the memory of the canyon still present in his mind. The morning light filtered through the window of his cabin, illuminating the floating dust in the air. His heart beat with anticipation at the thought of returning to Janelli and the sacred spring. He prepared carefully, checking his gear and mounting Atlas with precise movements. Every gesture was measured, as if anticipating the delicacy of the encounter that awaited him. The silence of the ranch contrasted with the inner agitation he felt, a nervousness mixed with deep respect. He rode along the familiar path, feeling the damp earth beneath the horse's hooves. The air was filled with the scents of the forest and the nearby river. Each step seemed to bring him closer to Janelli, and every sound reminded him of the life inhabiting the canyon. Upon reaching the edge, he saw the light reflecting off the crystal-clear water. The spring seemed to shine with a distinct, almost magical intensity. Roberto felt the energy of the place envelop him, reminding him of the previous afternoon and the silent bond that had begun to form between them. Janelli appeared from the bushes, elegant and steady. Her eyes met his with the same intensity as the first time. There were no words, only a silent exchange of understanding and respect. Roberto understood that every gesture of his needed to be careful, conscious, honoring the presence of the native woman. She invited him to approach, gently pointing to the edge of the spring. Roberto dismounted slowly, measuring each movement so as not to break the harmony in the air. The water shone between them, reflecting focused faces and the morning light. Janelli began collecting herbs and roots again, and Roberto watched, learning from her precise movements. Each gesture was an act of ancestral knowledge, and he felt the responsibility to respect and absorb that wisdom. Like an apprentice, before a silent, patient teacher, the cowboy asked about the uses of the plants, and Janelli responded with simple words and clear demonstrations. Roberto carefully imitated her movements, adjusting each step according to her observation. The connection between them strengthened with every shared gesture, uniting knowledge and mutual respect. The wind stirred the leaves and her hair, and Roberto noticed how Janelli seemed part of the landscape. Every movement she made was synchronized with the surroundings, as if the canyon itself guided her actions. He felt small, admiring her skill and harmony with nature. As they worked, A group of birds flew over the spring, casting shadows that danced on the water. Roberto focused on the ointment and roots, but could not shake the feeling that the canyon was watching them, reminding them they were in a living, sacred, and watched territory. Janelli indicated he could try applying the ointment, and Roberto did so carefully. Their hands brushed briefly while passing the herb mixture, and both felt a spark, a suspended moment where the presence of the other was more intense than any word. The sun rose, and the canyon filled with golden tones. Roberto understood that every instant there was a gift, a silent lesson in patience, observation, and respect. Janelli guided without imposing, teaching through action and attention. She pointed out new roots and leaves, explaining their uses with gestures. Roberto observed and carefully replicated each detail. Janelli's precision was impressive, and he felt that each lesson went beyond practical knowledge, touching the essence of tradition and canyon life. As the afternoon fell, the light changed, and the canyon filled with long shadows. Janelli indicated it was time to rest for a moment. Both sat by the spring, sharing a comfortable silence, full of respect and mutual understanding. The wind rippled the water's surface, and the reflections created shapes that seemed to dance. Roberto absorbed every movement, taking in the serenity of the place. Janelli observed him, evaluating his attention and patience, confirming with gestures that he was ready to continue learning without disrupting the canyon's balance. A deer crossed the canyon, and both watched it in silence. The creature moved gracefully, reminding them they were in a living, sacred space. Every action had to be measured and respectful. Roberto understood that his presence needed to be conscious and harmonious with everything around them. He attempted to repeat Janelli's gestures with more confidence, and she subtly corrected him with looks and movements. Each adjustment was a silent lesson, teaching him to balance strength and delicacy, action and observation. A dance of learning that strengthened his bond with her and with the canyon. The water reflected their faces and the sunlight, blending shadows and brightness. Roberto saw in Janelli a mixture of wisdom and firmness, someone who mastered her surroundings and taught with patience. He understood that this encounter was more than learning. It was a deep exchange of respect and presence. Janelli indicated they could gather some roots for the return, and Roberto followed her instructions carefully. Each plant collected was a reminder of the importance of respect, of observing before acting, and how every detail mattered in this ancestral environment. As they descended the trail, Roberto felt the closeness and trust that had grown between them. Their gestures were coordinated, respectful, and conscious. And although they did not speak, communication flowed clearly. Every step was a lesson in harmony and patience, shared without words. The canyon began to glow with orange and red as the afternoon approached. Janelli walked with confidence, and Roberto followed, aware of every movement. He knew that every moment there held meaning, and that the shared experience strengthened a silent and profound bond. Before reaching the edge, Janelli looked at him intensely, and Roberto felt that gesture contained more than words. It was an unspoken agreement. The connection would continue, trust was present, and their paths would cross again in mutual respect and shared learning. Roberto returned to the ranch carrying not only roots, but the feeling of respect and admiration for Janelli. Every thought brought him back to the canyon, reminding him of patience, teaching, in the presence of someone who had deeply impacted him, whose influence would continue to grow within him. The afternoon slowly fell over the ranch, painting the fields in golden and reddish tones. Roberto looked toward the horizon, recalling every gesture of Janelli by the spring. The serenity of the canyon accompanied him in memory, while the reality of the ranch called him to action. The sound of the wind through the grasses reminded him of the cadence of the river and the murmur of the leaves. Each note seemed to bring echoes of the encounter with Janelli, of her silent teachings, of the calm he had learned to find. Watching her move through nature, Roberto prepared his horse to depart for the canyon the next day. His mind replayed the details of Janelli's gestures, the precision with which she handled the roots, and the way her eyes conveyed knowledge without words. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, and Roberto felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He knew that each encounter with Janelli was an opportunity for learning and respect, and that he had to behave carefully, observing before acting, absorbing every detail attentively. While having dinner, he remembered how Janelli had guided him toward each plant. Seeing how harmonious and confident her movements were, he understood that there was more than instruction there. A bond of trust was forming with every shared gesture, silent and powerful. Night arrived with a starry sky that softly illuminated the ranch. Roberto contemplated each constellation, remembering the reflection of the stars in the canyon's water, and how Janelli seemed to fit with that natural harmony as if she were part of the landscape itself. Before sleeping, he checked his tools and prepared his belongings for the trip the next day. Each object had its place, and his attention to detail reflected what he had learned: science, observation, respect, and coordination, principles that Janelli had conveyed without a single word. At dawn, Roberto set out for the canyon. The fresh air gave him clarity, and every step of Atlas resonated with the promise of a meaningful encounter. The familiar path seemed different now, full of expectations and anticipation for the lessons that would continue. Upon reaching the edge of the spring, Janelli waited as always. Her gaze was steady, her posture elegant and serene. There were no immediate words, only an exchange of looks that spoke more than any conversation. A deep and silent understanding between two beings aware of the present. They began working with the roots and herbs. Roberto carefully replicated Janelli's movements, imitating her precision and observing the controlled strength in every gesture. Every action was measured, conscious, like a dialogue without words that strengthened their connection and mutual learning. The river's waters sparkled under the morning sun, reflecting both of their faces. Roberto felt that each reflection contained more than an image. They were lessons in patience, attention, respect for the environment, and for Janelli, who guided him with the gentleness of someone trusting her apprentice. Janelli pointed out new plants they needed to collect, and Roberto paid attention to every detail, ensuring he did not disrupt the harmony of the place. He understood that every gesture had a purpose. Every movement was a silent message, and he had to adapt to the cadence of the canyon and of Janelli. A deer appeared in the distance, and both watched it in silence. Its presence reminded them of the importance of respecting the life around them, not rushing their steps, and acting with awareness, integrating each lesson into a natural flow of observation and care. Roberto imitated Janelli's techniques, adjusting his movements under her attentive gaze. Each correction was subtle, with gestures and signals, without words, teaching him the harmony between strength and delicacy. He learned not only practical skills, but also how to integrate with nature and with her. The sun climbed higher, filling the canyon with warm light. Roberto felt a deep peace while working alongside Janelli, understanding that true teaching was mindfulness, patience, and respect, not only physical action, but connection with every element of the place. Janelli showed him how to prepare an ointment with the collected roots. Roberto watched attentively and carefully replicated the process, making sure to respect each step. His concentration and care reflected the seriousness of the learning, the importance of each action, and the bond being built between them. The water of the spring reflected the light and their movements, blending shadows and brightness. Roberto noticed the silent connection that strengthened with each interaction: trust, respect, and mutual attention, an understanding that transcended words and was felt in the precision of every shared gesture. Janelli guided him to a denser section of the nearby forest, showing rare plants and teaching their uses. Roberto followed her steps carefully, aware of the importance of not disturbing the place. Every action was an act of respect, every observation a deep lesson. The wind gently moved the leaves, creating a murmur that accompanied their movements. Roberto understood that the sound was part of the environment, part of the lesson. He had to remain attentive, not only to actions, but also to the rhythm of the place, integrating into a silent harmony with Janelli and the canyon. As they collected plants, an eagle crossed the sky, and both watched it silently. Roberto felt the weight of the moment, the connection with wildlife and Janelli's teaching. Patience, observation, and respect were essential, and harmony with nature was the true knowledge. Returning to the spring, Janelli showed him how to apply the ointment to certain leaves and roots. Roberto did so carefully, following each instruction and feeling that the learning went beyond action. It was understanding, respect, and deep attention to the flow of the canyon. The afternoon approached, and the canyon filled with warm colors. Janelli suggested a rest, and both sat by the water. The silence between them was comfortable, full of understanding, and the presence of the other conveyed more than any word: trust, respect, and attention. Roberto watched the sun's reflection on the water, and Janelli observed him with a calm gaze. Every shared moment was a reminder of patience, connection with the surroundings, and the importance of learning with respect and without haste, absorbing every silent teaching. Before leaving, Janelli showed him how to carefully carry some roots and herbs. Roberto did so attentively, remembering each gesture and lesson. The harmony between action and respect remained, and he understood that each encounter consolidated not only knowledge, but also a deep and silent bond. The sun slowly set, coloring the canyon in shades of orange and violet. Roberto returned to the ranch carrying not only roots, but also the feeling of learning, respect, and admiration for Janelli. Every step connected him to the shared experience and the bond that continued to grow. Dawn arrived with a sky tinted in pink and golden hues. Roberto carefully prepared his gear, recalling Janelli's lessons on patience and observation. Every tool had a purpose, and every movement had to be measured, respectful, in harmony with the surroundings. Janelli appeared by the river, moving with grace and serenity. Her presence radiated calm and focus, and Roberto felt that every step had to be in sync with her. The shared silence carried weight, and the connection between them grew with every breath of the canyon. As they walked toward the forest, Roberto watched as Janelli identified plants and roots with almost instinctive precision. Her hands moved with confidence and delicacy, and every gesture taught lessons of respect, attention to detail, and the importance of interacting with nature without disturbing its balance. The murmur of the river accompanied their steps. Janelli showed him how to recognize animal tracks and the rhythm of life in the canyon. Roberto carefully replicated her actions, learning to read every sign and move with caution, avoiding disruption of the harmony of the place. The wind gently moved leaves and branches, and sun rays filtered, changing shadows across the ground. Roberto noticed how Janelli used that light to better observe the plants. He understood that mindfulness was more important than the speed of his actions. They stopped in a clearing where a rare flower grew. Janelli explained how to use it for a remedy, and Roberto followed each instruction carefully. He learned not only the technique, but also respect for natural timing and the precision required in each step. An eagle flew over the canyon, and both watched it silently. The moment was filled with calm and reverence, and Roberto felt the importance of patience, silence, and absorbing every detail, every movement, every teaching that Janelli offered without the need for words. Janelli guided him to a denser area, teaching him to collect roots carefully. Roberto replicated her movements, concentrating on not damaging any plant. Every action was conscious, and he understood that true learning was not only physical, but also mental and spiritual, integrated into the harmony of the place. The sun rose higher, illuminating the canyon with a golden glow. Roberto felt that every moment with Janelli was transforming him. He was not only learning skills, but also a way to observe and respect the world, a silent rhythm he had to follow to fully understand his surroundings. They worked together preparing ointments and herbs. Roberto replicated every movement of Janelli, making sure not to make mistakes. He learned with full attention, understanding that every gesture had meaning, that each action required concentration, patience, and respect, and that everything had to integrate with the natural flow of the canyon. The river reflected their figures and the sunlight, creating a serene spectacle. Roberto observed Janelli's reflection and understood that learning went beyond action. It was a silent exchange, a deep connection with the place and with her. Janelli led him to a small clearing with leafy trees. She showed him how to prepare a natural remedy for pain. Roberto carefully replicated the steps, appreciating the combination of precision, knowledge, and respect that Janelli's guidance implied, and the tranquility that the place conveyed. The sound of birds and the wind created a natural melody. Roberto felt that every movement had to be in tune with that rhythm. He understood that his attention had to encompass everything: the place, the sounds, the shadows, and Haneli's presence merging with the flow of the environment. They worked for hours, collecting and preparing plants, always in silence. Every gesture of Janelli was a lesson in precision and respect. Roberto strove to imitate her, but also to internalize the calm and patience she conveyed, understanding that every action had a deep and silent purpose. The river reflected the midday light while they rested briefly. Roberto watched as Haneli deeply inhaled the canyon air, feeling her connection with nature. He understood that learning was absorbing every gesture, every breath, every glance, integrating everything into his own experience. Janelli showed him how to organize the collected plants and herbs. Roberto did so carefully and with concentration. Every movement had to be harmonious, unhurried, and he understood that true teaching was not only in knowing the plants, but also in respecting everything around them. A small deer appeared nearby, and both watched it without moving. Roberto felt the importance of not disturbing the life around them. Every encounter with nature was a reminder of patience, harmony, and the need to act with care and attention. They worked in silence while the sun dipped slightly. Roberto replicated Janelli's actions with precision. Every instruction, every silent correction reinforced mutual understanding. He learned not to rush gestures, to observe every detail, and to integrate Janelli's calm and harmony into his way of acting. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying dry leaves along. Roberto felt the serenity of the place and understood that every sound was a lesson. Learning to listen to nature and synchronize his movements with the canyon, his flow, became an essential part of his training with Janelli. Janelli showed him how to apply the prepared ointments. Roberto carefully replicated the process, feeling the responsibility of doing it correctly. Every action was measured, every gesture considered, and he understood that patience and respect were as important as technique, forming part of the essence of what he was learning. The canyon filled with warm light as the day progressed. Both worked in harmony, exchanging looks and gestures that consolidated the silent communication between them. Roberto felt that every moment with Haneli strengthened not only his skill, but also the connection that had formed between them. The sun neared the horizon, coloring the sky in orange and violet hues. Roberto and Janelli sat by the river to rest, contemplating the beauty of the place and the shared tranquility. Every moment strengthened the silent trust and understanding between them. Before returning to the ranch, Haneli showed him how to store and protect the collected plants. Roberto followed her instructions carefully and respectfully, aware that every action reflected what he had learned and consolidated the harmony between them and the canyon, between knowledge and mutual respect. The sky began to darken as they returned. Roberto felt the weight of the day and the depth of the teachings received. Every gesture of Haneli, every shared moment, transformed into a living lesson, a silent and powerful connection that would continue beyond the canyon. The river reflected the last rays of the sun, creating an atmosphere of calm and serenity. Roberto returned to the ranch with his heart full of gratitude and mindful attention. Every step reminded him of the lessons of patience, respect, and observation imparted by Janelli, consolidating a bond that went beyond action. The sky darkened slowly as Roberto and Janelli made their way toward the ranch. The air was filled with the calm of the afternoon, and every step seemed to resonate with the serenity they had learned to recognize and respect throughout the day. Janelli guided him gently, showing paths that could barely be distinguished among the undergrowth. Roberto followed attentively, aware of every movement. The silent connection they had developed allowed them to anticipate gestures, understand subtle signals, and maintain an almost instinctive harmony with every step they took. Twilight colored the canyon in violet and orange. Roberto breathed deeply, feeling how each lesson from Haneli settled within him. He was not only learning techniques, but also how to absorb the calm, attention, and patience that nature required and that she taught. As they walked, the sound of the river accompanied them like a constant murmur. Roberto observed how Janelli maintained full attention on everything around them. Every plant, every stone, every shadow had meaning, and he understood that learning was seeing beyond the obvious. an owl perched on a nearby branch, watching them with intense eyes. Roberto stopped, following Haneli's example, breathing in silence. Every encounter with wildlife was a lesson in respect and discretion, reminding him that nature demanded patience, observation, and humility. Janelli pointed to a path leading to a hill. Roberto understood that they had to climb to better observe the valley before returning. Each step was measured and secure, learning to move without disturbing anything, absorbing the harmony of the place and Janelli's silent guidance. The wind carried scents of wet earth and freshly cut herbs. Roberto realized that every detail had a purpose, not only to know the land, but to understand how to interact with it, respect it, and maintain its balance while acquiring knowledge that transcended physical action. Upon reaching the top of the hill, the valley unfolded before them like a living tapestry. Roberto contemplated the beauty and calm of the place. He understood that what he learned was not only manual, but spiritual. Nature taught those who knew how to listen and observe. Janelli invited him to sit and rest for a moment. They shared the silence, watching how the sunset light caressed the river and the treetops. Roberto felt that each instant reinforced the silent and deep connection that had grown between them during the day. As they descended, Roberto imitated every movement of Janelli with precision and respect. Every gesture reflected what he had learned, the patience and focus she taught. He understood that true mastery lay in integrating knowledge with mindfulness and harmony. The path narrowed, surrounded by shrubs and rocks. Roberto remained alert, following Haneli's guidance, who instructed him without words, using gestures and glances. Every action reflected the connection they had cultivated with the surroundings, with the day, and with nature itself. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, coloring the sky in red and golden tones. Roberto breathed the fresh air, feeling that every lesson settled in his mind and body. Calm, patience, and attention had become part of him. Janelli pointed to a small cabin at the edge of the ranch, reminding him that they had arrived. Roberto stopped, contemplating the structure illuminated by the last rays of the sun. He felt that each lesson of patience and observation culminated there, and that what he had learned had to integrate into his daily life. They walked toward the door. Every step was imbued with respect and care. Roberto understood that the day's experience was not just training, but a reminder of the harmony he had to maintain with the world around him, and that every moment could be a lesson if observed attentively. Entering the ranch, Roberto felt comforted by the familiarity of the place. However, he carried with him the serenity and focus that Haneli had taught him. Every object, every shadow, every sound was perceived with greater clarity, reflecting the patience and respect he had acquired. Janelli watched him with a calm smile, as if approving his progress. Roberto felt deep gratitude, not only for the technical teachings, but for the way she had shown him a way to relate to nature and life, full of attention and harmony. Twilight gave way to night, and the moonlight softly illuminated the ranch. Roberto moved carefully, silently applying what he had learned with every step. The connection with the surroundings felt natural, and every action was imbued with respect and calm. Janelli guided him inside the ranch, showing how to organize the collected items. Roberto replicated every gesture, aware of the importance of each detail. He understood that patience, observation, and harmony had to be applied in every action, even in seemingly simple and routine tasks. The aroma of dinner and the smoke from the hearth created a cozy atmosphere. Roberto set down his tools and breathed deeply. Every teaching from Haneli seemed to integrate with his own breath, and he understood that the true lesson was not only technical, but a learning on how to live attentively and respectfully. Janelli moved naturally, showing how to prepare the ingredients and maintain order. Roberto replicated each step, feeling that every action had a purpose. He understood that every gesture was an extension of the harmony learned throughout the day, and that he had to remain mindful at all times. The starry sky reflected in the ranch windows. Roberto and Janelli shared a moment of silence, contemplating the vastness of the world around them. He understood that the patience and attention learned had no limits, and that nature always offered new lessons to those who listened. The murmur of the wind among the trees and the nearby river accompanied the ranch's tranquility. Roberto felt connected to everything, to Gianelli, to the land, to every creature, and to his own breath. The calm of the day had become part of him. Before retiring to rest, Roberto silently thanked Gianelli. Every lesson, every gesture, and every moment of observation had transformed him. He understood that what he had learned was not limited to physical knowledge, but was a deep understanding of patience, harmony, and respect. Night covered the ranch with a serene blanket. Roberto settled into sleep, aware that the day had marked a before and after in the way he perceived life. Every moment with Gianelli had been a silent and powerful lesson. The last rays of moonlight illuminated the room as Roberto closed his eyes. Every sound, every shadow, and every memory of the day blended, consolidating the experience. He knew that Gianelli's teachings would always accompany him, guiding his actions, thoughts, and the way he would observe the world. With a calm breath and a heart full of gratitude, Roberto surrendered to rest. The night was complete and silent, and in his mind echoed the lessons of the day: patience, respect, and harmony, the legacy of Gianelli that had become part of him.